Well, this lecture is on scientists and psychics, and the next lecture is on, which is the last lecture, is the importance of replicability. Because, as we said from the first, the important thing is if you're going to think well about any problem, you have to have good information. It's the garbage in, garbage out thing we've been emphasizing. And now you know lots of reasons why you can't trust unaided observation, intuition, personal validation, etc. And I want to tell you how many years ago, I think, when I first got my PhD in psychology, I got fascinated by reading about or hearing about some really prominent scientists who got themselves involved with a psychic of some sort and ended up endorsing a psychic. And so I made an effort to look at every case I could find, and then I was hoping, how could I study this as a psychologist? I'm an experimental psychologist. And for experimental psychologists, you get people in the laboratory and you randomly divide people into groups and you give one group one treatment and another treatment. I can't go back in history and dig these guys up and do experiments with them as such. But I did find over the years, I would go and read their studies, and in one case, a couple of cases, I actually hired people to translate from the French, some particular French scientists, because I found that in some cases, these people wrote a lot, very prolific, and somehow I thought I could see how their minds are working and figure out from that alone, get a pretty good idea what is going on here, how this person could be so competent and smart, and at the same time get themselves into bizarre beliefs. And so I collected over the years a lot of these cases, and I was always thinking of maybe writing a book on it, and I still have all the case enough to write a book, I suppose. The hope was that even though it's not the science that I'm used to doing, that in some ways I could, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I have in mind. I could use their own writing, and through that writing you would see the parts of the mind and how they're getting themselves into trouble. One thing I want to emphasize is that, how many heard of Kuhn, Theodore Kuhn? Okay, he became a sort of a hero of the outsider type groups of people in science and stuff like that. Thomas Kuhn.
The Scientific Revolution.
Scientific Revolution, where he had this idea that science proceeds in normal science as puzzle solving, and we go around solving puzzles, and every once in a while, within a disciplinary matrix of a scientific specialty, you're building up theories and stuff like that, and you keep adding a few more things to the system and keep tweaking it every once in a while. But every once in a while, within any scientific field, there's enough tweaks, enough anomalies, as he called them, that accumulate, so it's too much. And eventually this leads to a complete revolution, an overthrow of the old system, and this chaos, and then the new system takes over, and now you're back to normal science again, and then every once in a while there's this big revolution again. And this was very controversial, and it still is. It's not as clear-cut as that, and many things he called revolutions could be seen as revolution, but also could be seen as consistent with science as usual. But anyways, he used the term paradigm, and that's why all the New Agers and stuff like that, paradigm is their most used word, and you don't hear it so much anymore, but everyone was talking about a new paradigm. Parapsychologists say they're creating a new paradigm, and all these other people who were trying to be, thought they were going to challenge the establishment, they're going to create a new paradigm. And a lady, I'm trying to think of her name, I think her name was Masters, during one symposium, and it's in a book, she uncovered 42 separate uses of the term paradigm in his book on scientific revolutions, and they're all incompatible with one another. He admitted that. In a later article, he said, she's right. And I did was inconsistent in the use of paradigm. And so he restricted paradigm, and he changed what he really originally meant by paradigm. He called it disciplinary matrix. What he meant by disciplinary matrix, he meant that in any field, well-developed field of science especially, there is a confluence of facts that they've accumulated, theories, hypotheses, but even more than that, of ways of understanding how you go do this kind of a research, what kinds of instruments you need, what controls you need, and what controls you don't need within this field, and all that becomes, and ways of doing things, that becomes part of the disciplinary matrix. And within any field of science, as well, especially well-developed ones, you're working within a disciplinary matrix. And the reason I want to bring that up is because I think that's a very important concept to help us explain how it is that top-notch scientists, the ones I've paid attention to, many of them just go out and test psychics suddenly, and they fall for everything. And it looks like it's ridiculous. How could they competent scientists do non-science and think they're doing science? And it dawned on me finally, after reading what they say and figuring it all out, that most scientists are not aware of what they're doing. In other words, they learn implicitly. They become like apprentices. Most of the scientists, you apprentice. You have postdoctorates and stuff like that. Then you work with colleagues, and first you have your supervisor, and eventually you implicitly absorb what we call the aspects of the matrix. So you implicitly know what to do in your field. You implicitly know if you want to figure out whether this guy's experiment was correct or not. You explicitly know what questions you should ask and what you would have to do to do it right or wrong. And you understand these things, but it's implicit. Very few scientists can explicitly tell you what is good science. That's why the philosophers of science is trying to tell them that. But some scientists do write about what science is, and they are more explicit about it. But most scientists, even the best of them, they're good in their fields, but they can't tell you why they're good. They don't understand why they succeed as good scientists. They can do good science. But when they step outside of that matrix, they don't have that supporting context. They don't have the background, all that information, what we call the good mindware. That's implicitly underlying everything they do in this field. They don't realize that they're outside of that. This field can be consistent, be thought of as I'm not supposed to move around like this, as a safety net. So as long as they're working within their disciplinary matrix, they have the safety net. Now, safety net keeps them. The safety net consists of colleagues, but also rivals within their field, and they know what the rivals are going to say if they do this and that. So they're always aware of these things, and it keeps them honest and keeps them also from doing boo-boos. And this is how they can be good at their field. But they don't understand that, so when they leave their field, they want to study a psychic. This is one of the things. Okay, now I can go into other reasons for that, but I want to jump to rather than talk about. I want to tell you some of the examples of the past, but I don't want to get into details so that we don't have the time. There was Sir William Crookes, very famous chemist, physicist, just before the turn of the ninth. He was in the late 1800s, and he did he was editor of his own journal in physics, and he was a well-established scientist, but he became also notorious, you might say, or famous, whatever side of the issue you're on, for dealing with namely Douglas Hume. H-O-M-E is his name. He spelled his name, but he called himself Hume. He was from American, but he thought he had a Scottish ancestry, and maybe he was related to the famous David Hume. Was one of his ancestors, perhaps. So that's why he called himself Hume. He is known as even today, among parapsychologists especially, as that the one medium who never was caught cheating of any kind. Well, he was never caught cheating because he never allowed himself to be tested by any inadequate way, but he still has this reputation of never being caught cheating. He got a famous reputation. I won't go into all the details, but the only time he was scientifically ever tested at all was by Crookes. Crookes did some experiments with Hume, and he had some, I won't go into it, he made some special equipment, and he said that Hume was able to have a lever move, supposedly by spirits, without touching it and so on. The other thing he became notorious for was Florence Cook. She was a young, sort of attractive, supposedly, spirit who could materialize a psychic, a spirit who came from the other world but who once lived in this world. And those people who attended seances with Florence Cook at Cook's home were very much impressed with how wonderfully similar to Florence that this spirit medium looked. Spirit that came from the spirit world. She materialized. And when she materialized, Florence Cook was supposedly in a trance behind a curtain. But she never saw the two together, okay? And so Scott was suspicious of it. And for some reason, even though Crookes claimed he'd done scientific type of work in the laboratory with Hume, with her, he just described the phenomena, took pictures, but, and at one point he did say he did see them together, but it was very vague. So that was a notorious case. I won't go into details. I just want to give you the kind of case. Alfred Russel Wallace is my favorite of all. He's the co-founder with Darwin of the theory of evolution by natural selection. In fact, many people think what happened was that Darwin's working for years on the theory and not ready to publish yet because there's always some things he still might have to work out. Wallace, living out in the East Indies and stuff like that, what we now call that, in the jungles all by himself, gets one of the fevers there from the fevers out there, and malaria maybe. And he's in his camp all by himself, high fever, and he gets this big idea, which is basically the theory of natural selection. And he writes it out, and he sends it to the only person he knows in the field back in England, who's Charles Darwin, he's heard of. And this created this big dilemma for Darwin. What does he do about it? This guy got his theory, it scooped him in a way. But they made the powers that be realized what the situation was. They fixed it up very nicely, and they had a joint paper, and it was called the Darwin-Wallen theory for a while, or the Wallace-Darwin. Many people put it the other direction, the Wallace-Darwin theory for a while. You don't hear about Wallace anymore in relation to that. And you don't hear about it because soon after he came back to England, after the years out being picking plants and being a naturalist out in the wilds, he became friends with Darwin and all the other people, although he was from a lower class, self-educated. Almost all the scientists at that time were very wealthy people who had the time and the money to carry out research. And Wallace was an outsider. He was very poor all his life, and he always was struggling to make money and stuff like that by somebody keeping himself going so he could do his research. Top-notch scientist, though, in many ways, as a naturalist, and he's known for the Darwin, Wallace line, and he did some other famous things. But today he's not that famous, and many biographers think he's not that famous because he became an embarrassment. He even challenged his own theory of natural selection after being the major champion of it when he got back to England. He said it doesn't apply to the higher spiritual levels of man. That's an exception. And That came about because he began sitting in on seances when he came back, and one of his house lady, house worker, she became also a medium and produced some phenomena for him and stuff like that. Okay, so that's a big, and many other things that Wallace defended. Wallace was, his whole life, he defended phrenology and stuff like that, at the same time doing very good work. And it's hard to dislike the guy. I've read almost everything he's ever written. He's very prolific. He lived a long life to his late 90s. And obviously a smart guy, but self-educated, never had the opportunity to go through any colleges and stuff like that. And a very likable guy, and you read his arguments for phrenology and stuff like that, they're fascinating. But you learn how his mind works. And then there was several others. We can go all the way down there, and several famous ones. But I'm going to jump down to the present. Because we already talked about Russell Targ, and I mentioned also his buddy Harold Puloff, who were the two physicists at the time I went to Stanford Research Institute in 1972. I told you the story. They were studying Uri Geller. Okay, there were some other scientists that also looked at Uri Geller. And in about 1974, I think it was, Nature, the top general science magazine in the world, very conservative, published a paper by John Hasted, and David Bohm, some of the very top physicists you could get together in England, about 5 of them. And it was on there, ideas about how you study someone like Uri Geller, how you deal with a person like Uri Geller. And now I want to show you how you can get into the minds of these people by what they write, even. Here we are. So this is a later book by one of the people that wrote this thing. This is the cover of a book. It's called The Metal Benders, John Hasted, one of Britain's top physicists at the time. He passed away only fairly recently. But Hasted, here, let me get this down so you can see the top. There it is, like that, okay. I just want to show you the cover of one of his major books on primary, he called this primary metal bending. And he not only studied Geller, but he studied a lot of other astronauts, or children especially, that he studied, who could apparently, after seeing Geller, they could bend spoons as well, and metal. And so he did devote his laboratory to it, and was a major supporter of the reality of the thing. But here was this article that appeared in Nature in 1975, okay? It was 1972 that Geller burst on the scene here. That's when I went to see him at Stanford Research Institute. But John Hasted, David Bohm, those who know about physics or history of science know David Bohm is one of the top men at the time, and Baston and O'Regan, other side physicists as well. So these 4 physicists wrote this article and got it published in Science and Nature, rather. And the point of the article was, when you're studying someone like Uri Geller, a psychic or a claimed psychic like Uri Geller, you can't treat him as like he's a particle or something like that, or an object. You've got to realize that you're dealing with a sentient human being who has feelings and stuff like that. So this is an article that they wrote in Nature on how you have to deal with a psychic like that. It's strange you never consult a psychologist who's dealing with real people all the time, or almost real people, college sophomores, but they're going to come real people sometime. Okay, so I'm taking these quotes. I just want to show you that you go even to their scientific articles and you can see that we can learn something about how the minds are working and how they can get themselves into trouble. These are physicists. And physicists don't know anything about people at all, right? You know that. They get in their laboratories and they look at bubble chambers, and they look at equipment and stuff like that, but they never see any living thing, right? Okay. So now they are confronted by Geller. They've had some experiences with Geller, and he does things that, wow. And they have no idea how it happened, so they feel this is important to study. So we have come to realize that in certain ways, the traditional ideal of completely impersonal approach of the natural sciences to experimentation will not be adequate in this domain. This domain, I mean studying psychics like Geller. Rather, there is a personal aspect that has to be taken into account in a way that is somewhat similar to that needed in the disciplines of psychology and medicine. Why didn't they call in psychologists and medicine? They're at the universities and they have colleagues there. Don't they talk to one another? Well, that's strange, okay. This does not mean, of course, that it is not possible to establish facts which we can count securely. And remember, the whole point of this course is how to have facts that you can count on before you think. If you're thinking with facts that you don't know, you can't count on as being secure, then you're having what we call contaminated mindware. And contaminated mindware is one of the major reasons how intelligent people can be stupid, right? Rather, it means that we have to be sensitive and observant to discover what is a right approach, which will properly allow for the subjective element and yet permit us to draw reliable inferences. So as scientists, they want to draw reliable inferences, but they realize they're going to have to not do it quite the way a physicist does it. So in the study of psychokinetic phenomena, don't know, how many don't know what psychokinetic is?
The moving thing with your mind.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. The idea of psychokinesis is that part of parapsychology which has to do with mind over matter, okay? So in the study of psychokinetic phenomena, such conditions are more important than in the natural sciences because the person who produces the phenomena is not an instrument or a machine. Any attempt to treat him as such, this is before they had to say him or her, I guess, but any attempt to treat him as such will almost certainly lead to failure. Rather, he must be considered to be one of the group, actively cooperating in the experiment and not a subject whose behavior is to be observed from the outside in a cold and impersonal manner as possible. I suspect that's one reason they didn't want to bring in psychologists, because our people call our people we study subjects. I guess I think that's already said something bad. Isn't that right, Barbara?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so we see there's a start of a problem here, right? We have found also that it's generally difficult to produce a predetermined set of phenomena. Although this may sometimes be done, what happens is often surprising and unexpected. Now, if we go back to the first lecture on key bending, the reason I did it is because I want to emphasize that when you don't know what to expect, you can't rely on what is described afterwards, right? It's very important to have a plan. This is the whole point of science, is that they have to plan their observations so they know what to expect, what to look for. But they find that studying psychics like Geller, you can't do that. Because what happens is often surprising and unexpected. And of course, if you're a magician or a deceiver, you want it to be surprising and unexpected. If it's expected, they'll catch you. Okay. We've observed that the attempt to concentrate strongly in order to obtain a desired result, for example, the bending of a piece of metal, tends to interfere with the relaxed state of mind needed to produce such phenomena. These guys are getting themselves into real trouble here, right? However, they're aware that this is going to create problems, and that some people are going to say, hey, you're setting yourself up to be tricked. They're not stupid people. They're, as I said, they are, at that time, the most eminent physicists in England. And sometimes in the world, perhaps. One of the first things that reveals itself as one observes that, is this a duplicate of what I just had there? Oh, no, okay. It's closed. Is that psychokinetic phenomena cannot in general be produced unless all who participate are in a relaxed state. Now, I don't know about you, but if you're doing experiments, you want to not be too relaxed because you want to be at the right moment. You want to be focused on what's going on. Okay, a feeling of tension, fear, or hostility on the part of any of those present generally communicates itself to the whole group. The entire process goes most easily when all those present actively want things to work well. In addition, matters seem to be great. By the way, this is published in the major magazine, science magazine in the world, right? In addition, matters seem to be greatly facilitated when the experimental arrangement is aesthetically or imaginatively appealing to the person with apparent psychokinetic powers. Okay? This is what I love. This will be the last one I'm going to give you a quote from them, but I still can't believe it. Okay. How then are we to avoid the possibility of being tricked? They're aware of that, that they're setting themselves out to be tricked, but they want to avoid the possibility, but still be not antagonize or not threaten the phenomena they're studying. It should be possible to design experimental arrangements that are beyond any reasonable possibility of trickery, and that magicians will generally acknowledge to be so. In the first stages of our work, we did in fact present Mr. Geller with several of such arrangements. Notice that they've presented Geller, they've actually worked out arrangements they thought could meet all their conditions and yet be devoid of trickery. But these proved to be aesthetically unappealing to him. And of course, they've already said in the previous statement that it's very important that everything be aesthetically appealing to the person. And unfortunately, this was out. And so they couldn't get away with that. Okay. They were hoping in that article, the whole point of that article, they were writing that they had a lot of experiments with Geller, but they realized that there was magicians and other scientists weren't going to approve of their controls and stuff. So they were showing that the reason they had to not have the kind of controls that scientists ordinarily would use in the physics laboratory is because of the nature of the subject matter and the sensitivity. But they also wrote this article showed, but they had no doubts, they had confidence that they'd be able to develop the right kind of arrangements that would not threaten Geller or inhibit him, but still avoid the possibility of any trickery. And of course, Geller never came back to be tested by them, and that never happened. Now, the next thing I want to tell you about related to that, which relate things, is that in 1987, Deborah, so we're about 10 years, just about 10 years. No, same year, 1987. Oh no, that was 1970. The other one, okay. So this is about 10 years later. Deborah Delanoy, I think she still is, was a parapsychologist at the laboratories, the parapsychological laboratories set up in Scotland by some fund, I forget the name of the fund. They established a fund for parapsychological work, and they wanted to give it to Cambridge, but Cambridge didn't want it. So they offered it to Oxford didn't want it. It became a kind of a scandal, and that all this money for a department of parapsychological research was being offered to the major universities, and major universities did not want it. So finally, the University of Edinburgh in Scotland took it, set up a department, and they had Robert Morris, a very good parapsychologist, and I was a good friend of mine, actually, I respect in some ways. And Robert Morris took over. He was a parapsychologist, a believer, but a very good one, a very careful person, and took over. And his strategy to sell it to the rest of the people in the University of Edinburgh, because this is controversial, was that he made the department a parapsychology department, but also one that studied deceptions and ways people can be tricked. And you could get a degree in either one or combine the two, parapsychology under him. And one of his products, George Pierce here. And Roger is now probably one of the top skeptics and top people in England and all over the world, actually. And he has websites and books galore, and he is quite a guy. And he was he at TAMNY this year?
He's been at
a number of TAMs, right. And a very colorful person, and obviously a good skeptic, does skeptical work. And his girlfriend, though, is a parapsychologist from at the University of Edinburgh, and I don't know how they get along, but they maybe get along like other people I know who are mixed that way. They just don't discuss it. But she's very good, though. But anyway, So, let me give you some, at Deborah Delanoy at the University of Edinburgh, the parapsychologist, she, this young high schooler came to her laboratory and said that he wanted to be tested because he has psychokinetic powers. He can bend spoon with his mind and stuff like that. And she was charmed by him and thought it was plausible, and he seemed a nice fellow, and she liked him, and so she did some experiments with him. Actually, ultimately took well over a year, I think, that they spent. He would come into the lab and do things with him. They weren't quite pinning it down. They then, at one point, contacted Randy, because one thing he did, one time he came into the laboratory with, by the way, every time they did think, they had the cameras on him, they put him on, leave him, I'm sorry, but they had the camera on him, a camera on him. Nothing would happen in the range of the cameras, but outside the range, things would happen. There'd be fires started, or metal would bend and stuff like that, but by every time he was under the camera, it just didn't happen. And so there was very, it was just like what was going on in SRI earlier. But one day he came into the laboratory and he had there's these puzzles, it's in a plastic box, it's like a square, a cube, and there's a coiled thing in there where you have a little ball and it's a puzzle where you try to move it while everything's sealed in that thing there. He came in and the metal tube or whatever is in that thing had been twisted in a very interesting way, and the cube was still sealed. And he said he just looked at it and that's what happened. It bent like that. And they couldn't figure out any way this could have been done, but they sent the cube to Randy. They mailed it to Randy. And Randy is excellent at this. By the way, Randy is good, one of the best psychic investigators and stuff like that, not because he's a magician. He says it's because he's a magician. That's why the people say you always have to have a magician. Magicians are fooled, were very badly fooled by Geller, and very bad. There's a history of magicians endorsing psychics and stuff like that. A magician, because they are a magician, are not necessarily the best person to catch trickery by psychics. Most magicians, when Geller came along, didn't know anything about spoon bending or how he bent and stuff like that. And some magicians made a fool of themselves by endorsing Geller as a psychic. And one in England, a well-known magician, I won't say his name, actually still insists that Geller, he's a good friend of Geller's, and he still insists that Geller has some real powers. So magicians, and throughout history, there have been magicians who endorsed, they're like in the world of science, you can find scientists who go and endorse psychics, but you also find magicians who do it. So Randy is great because he's a Renaissance man. He knows lots of things. People don't realize that Randy knows quite a bit about science, even though he wasn't educated in it. He knows a lot about other things. He is what you call a polymath. He knows lots of things. And so Randy looked at this box. He knew what to look for. He knew how to study it, and he could see that it had been tampered with a little bit, how they'd opened it. And so he sent that back to them and with showing how it had actually been opened. You could see it when he pointed it out. They could see it. They hadn't been able to see it until he pointed it out. He also sent them back another box, which he said, if he tampered with it, this one, they would be to leave it. They had to fix it so that it was tamper-proof, in a sense. If he tampered with it, it would leave a trace. And of course, he wouldn't do anything with the new box. He couldn't. But even their contact was Randy, and they talked to Randy, communicated with him otherwise. He gave them some advice what to do and stuff like that. But still, they continued with this guy, and he kept coming back. And I said for about a year and a half, maybe. Okay, so eventually, and by the way, they had two cameras, but they only kept one camera on. Their idea was that it would be immoral, unethical to put a secret camera on it. So they had that kind of thing. But they finally, Randy, I guess maybe convinced them, they finally got to the point after working with him so long and not being able to capture anything, they finally also used a hidden camera, and everything blew up at that point. They discovered he was frauding, cheating him. Okay, so here's just two quotes from her. During the time we had worked together, I felt I came to know Tim fairly well. We had established what appeared to be an honest, friendly, and trusting rapport. If he was fraudulent, I thought he either deserved an Academy Award for a most convincing performance or that he was prone to severe self-delusions at the least. By the way, this is a problem all the time, is when people assume that they can judge people's honesty or sincerity, where you got trouble, okay? On the other hand, you can see what's going on here. These people feel they want to do this because they really are, they feel that you're dealing with a sensitive human being. You've got to treat them as a sensitive human being. Unfortunately, you're in a catch-22 situation. If you really let them be part of the process and stuff like that, you are opening the door to, even I could get away with anything under those conditions. They're going to give me the keys to the storeroom. Okay. Why hadn't I been willing to give Tim's PK ability the benefit of the doubt when evidence was against doing so? In considering this question, I discovered two aspects of my relationship with Tim which may have contributed to my apparent reluctance to recognize that Tim's claims were false. Firstly, I was biased towards liking Tim, both initially and as our relationship developed. Secondly, I was biased towards believing him. So this is how she explains that. I thought you'd find that interesting. So what we're talking about always throughout this course and using the framework and stuff is how to make sure you've got good evidence, or to be sure you have good evidence before you begin thinking about it. And so I go back to one of my favorite people. Claude Bernard was a very important person in medicine, the beginnings of medicine, and he helped establish the experimental basis for medicine. And his book, I'm trying to remember, an introduction to medical research or something like that. It's in paperback in Dover, and it's my favorite book. Many other things. He was well ahead of his time. And this is a quote I love of his, which I think is very central to this course. A good method promotes scientific development and forewarns men of science against those numberless sources of error which they meet in the search for truth. This is the only purpose of the experimental method. Think about that. A second quote from the book, which clinches it for me. If the facts used as a basis for reasoning are ill-established or erroneous, everything will crumble or be falsified. And it is thus that errors in scientific theories most often originate in errors of fact. And again, as I say, it's a recurring theme in this course. And it's the garbage in, garbage out. And it's the basis for several things I've been pointing out here. Okay, and it's what Stanovich would call contaminated mindware. And once you have in your memory and everything else, you have a contaminated mindware, your thinking, unfortunately, is going to be very, very problematic. Another thing related to this is Richard Feynman, and in his fascinating book, Cargo Cult Science, Feynman said this: the first principle of science is that you must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool. Keep that in mind. So you have to be very careful about that. After you've not fooled yourself, it's not easy not to fool other scientists. You just have to be honest in a conventional way after that. So that's the other important thing. Now we jump to some psychology here, also related to the fact that good mindware, in other words, having good mindware, good knowledge and good facts, as well as being able to know when to allocate your precious cognitive resources, is the best thing you can do in trying to think correctly about dubious claims. These are two psychologists who study, have a long history of studying logical thinking and stuff like that. They say, when an argument is compatible, its conclusions seem probable, and it is unlikely that there will be a fallacy in it. Hence, there is little justification for engaging in a mentally costly deliberative search of memory. In contrast, when an argument is incompatible, its conclusion seems improbable, and it is likely that it contains a fallacy. Consequently, there is a good reason to devote extra mental effort, mental work, needed to find the fallacy. Now, could be very controversial, actually.
What's his definition of compatible?
Compatible is that when someone comes up to you and says, look, I just did an interesting experiment where I tested therapeutic touch and it doesn't work. There's a young girl at the time, Emily Rosie, you may have heard about her, and she did as a science fair project at her school. She was 11 or 12, I think, 12. She tested some therapeutic touch people to see whether, in fact, they could detect, when they couldn't see, where a hand was here or over here, you see, by just, because they claim they can, feel auras around the body. And she, with the science fair project, she showed that they couldn't do it, apparently. Well, this is compatible with apparently the JMA and a lot of other skeptics, skeptical scientists and medical people who don't believe in therapeutic touch. And so Emily Rose's science fair project got published as a JMA paper.
So it means
Now,
compatible with what you already think?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what compatible means. Yeah, that's what it means.
Is that like Occam's razor?
What's that?
Is that similar to Occam's razor?
Well, no, what he's saying, as I understand, what he's saying is that, look, when someone comes along with a proposition, a statement that's consistent with what you already believe or know, you don't spend much time thinking about it. You don't waste your time thinking about it. But if someone comes along with something that is incompatible with what you know, so if Emily Rose had tested those people in her little experiment, and they had come out with, she came out saying, it worked. They can detect where my hand is better than chance. She would have gotten flack from everyone. Every skeptic in the world would have torn her experiment apart, which is very easy, because no experiment is perfect. And she's a little girl at a science fair, and it was just a very simple experiment. But it was so pleasing that it did come out the way a lot of people wanted it to come out, that the Journal of the American Medical Association even published it.
Mm-hmm.
They're very tough on what they publish. So because it was compatible with their viewpoint. So this is it. But this can be a dangerous approach, but yet there is sense to this. They want to make the point that, in fact, if we always are questioning everything the same way, we never get through the day. And in fact, there's some sense to doing that, but you also got to realize there's some problems with it. But anyways, I'm going pushing that issue there. I've used that to get into this. Here's a philosopher science. Mistaken beliefs will, as a result of belief perseverance, I mentioned this earlier, belief perseverance, which is a psychological term, will taint our perception of new data. So this would be like our new terminology we've been talking about in this course. This is like saying contaminated mindware because of belief perseverance will taint your perception of new data. It's another way of saying that, however, whatever your background, whatever knowledge you have is going to color it. You can't help it. You always got to approach any new data or any new object of that with, in terms, against the background of what you already know. So by the same token, however, belief perseverance will serve to color our perception of new data with our pre-existing beliefs when our pre-existing beliefs are accurate. So what he's saying simply is that, look, if you have mistaken beliefs and you take in new data and you assimilate it to those mistaken beliefs, you're going to be wrong. You're just increasing your... On the other hand, he said that that's a good, bad feature of it, of our belief perseverance. But on the other hand, at the same token, if in fact your beliefs prior to encountering new data are correct, when you encounter new data and interpret in terms of your current beliefs, you're going to be even more correct, right? So he wants to point out that there's another side to the coin, and I'm pointing this out for another reason. How many have heard of read St. Matthew? Know about St. There are several versions of this, but this is famous. This is according to the Gospel, according to St. Matthew. For unto everyone that hath shall be given. You've heard this before? And he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not, shall be taken away, even that which ye have. This is the principle of Republican economics. The should get richer, and the poor should get poorer. This is the basis of it, right? This is the idea why they don't want any more tax proposals going to touch that very rich upper 1% of the very wealthy. It's a religious gospel with them, apparently. Anyways, this is a famous thing. It's called, sometimes it's used in sociology by Merton he called it many years ago. He was a sociologist of science in the good sense. There are sociologists of science now who are really anti-science. But anyway, Merton called it the Matthew principle. The principle, in the Matthew principle, he wanted to show how fame gets about. If you become famous very early in science, that makes it easy to become even more famous. If you very early begin your career without any knowledge, without anyone knowing about you, it's going to be much harder as you progress in your career to get any. You're going to get more and more go into the backwaters and become unknown. That's the Matthew principle. So the idea of the Matthew principle is that things develop. In other words, those who start with an advantage are going to have even more advantages. It's going to multiply. And those who start with disadvantage, it's going to get worse. And so that's the idea of the Matthew principle. It's used a lot of ways. It's used by psychologists of reading to try to show that getting kids to begin reading very early as you can, is a very helpful one. And so children who grow up in families where they're encouraged to read and stuff very early gather certain kinds of modules in their mind and stuff like that, which makes it easier to now read new things and read better things. They get better and better and better. Whereas if you start off in a disadvantaged environment where there are no books and no one encourages you to do that, you get worse and worse as you go up the educational scale. That's called the Matthew principle, and it's applied to reading. But as we see, it's also applied to how come scientists and smart people can go badly wrong. And the idea comes from the idea of knowledge projection. Here's how Keith Sandvich puts it in his book, Who is Rational? This argument that in a natural ecology where most of our prior beliefs are true, projecting our beliefs onto new data will lead to faster accumulation of knowledge. I will term the knowledge projection argument. So that in the natural state of things, most of your prior beliefs about situation are true beliefs, you will accumulate more and more new data, which will be consistent with your true beliefs, and you'll be even smarter. Okay. Thus, knowledge projection, which in the aggregate might lead to more rapid induction of new true beliefs, may be a trap in cases where people, in effect, keep reaching into a bag of beliefs that are largely false, using these beliefs to structure their evaluation of evidence, and hence more quickly adding incorrect beliefs to the bag for further projection. So if you're starting with false beliefs, and you start going further, you're going to build up even a bigger, get more and more into a situation where you're believing falsely. You can, without going further, you can begin thinking how you could apply it to scientists who go astray. Within their disciplinary matrix, they've already built up through other scientists and through a whole matrix, they built up a body of beliefs, well tested over and over again, of good information. And so when they encounter new information, new experiments, they can assimilate that new stuff, the new information to the old stuff, tweak the old stuff so it's even better, and their total amount of information of useful and good information and correct information is even bigger. On the other hand, that same thing goes with the persons people start with wrong information. Now, when a scientist is in his matrix and he steps out of that matrix, begins looking at spiritual mediums and stuff like that, the only information available is the stories, not scientific information, by people who believe that they do see spirits and these spirits really can do what they claim, or if they start to work with Geller, they step out of their physics laboratory and work with Geller, only thing they can see is that, and they've heard stories about it, that's why they go to see Geller, that this guy can bend metal with his mind. So they're already starting with a basis of wrong beliefs. They're already get the idea that this guy really can bend metal with his mind. They start that way, and then as they accumulate things, they're going to get worse and worse, deeper and deeper into poo-poo, you know. So they're in trouble. So this is called the Matthew effect when we apply it to why scientists go astray. And again, I'll quote from Who is Rational by Keith. Knowledge projection from an island of false beliefs might explain the phenomena of otherwise intelligent people who get caught in a domain-specific web of falsity and because of projection tendencies cannot escape. They cannot escape otherwise competent physical scientists who believe in creationism, for example. And indeed, such individuals often use their considerable computational powers to rationalize their beliefs and to ward off the arguments of skeptics. This is another point which I should have made, but I will make now. I could have made earlier, but I'll make it now, is that one of the ways, in fact, there's a book called Who is Stupid? Why Smart People Can Be So Stupid. That was the title of a book, a collection of articles by experts on this, by Robert Sternberg. It's, I think about 10 years old now, no, less than 10 years old. And Sternberg got these experts, different people in different fields of psychology, to write what their analysis of how it could be that smart people could be so stupid. And then he asked me to read all of the chapters that have been accumulated and write an overarching chapter at the beginning of the book on why, see if I can put together all the theories that the other people had and write a chapter. And I did. So I write the introductory chapters to that book. It's a long one. And I concluded that smart people can be wrong and stupid just because they're so smart, which is the basis of this thing as well. In other words, they can now, starting with the wrong basis of information, if they now have brains and have intelligence, the kind of smartness to be able to do it, they can use that basis to very cleverly argue for their position, which is wrong, and make it even worse. So one of the ironies of that smart people can be so stupid just because they're so stupid.
Well, isn't there a similar type of thing that they may even be arrogant about, I'm so smart, therefore somebody's not capable of fooling me?
That could be, yes, could be. Also, what Kathy is saying, which is a good point, is that there's also a motivational part, a self-importance aspect to this, so that I am so smart, my self-image is so smart that it's unlikely no one's going to be able to fool me. And of course, magicians and deceivers of all kinds, scammers, love that kind of thing. Turns out that the most famous book on con artists was written during the 30s by David Maurer, called The Big Con, and later was republished as The American Confidence Man. He was a professor at University of Louisville and professor of English, was interested in the language of the underworld. And as he wrote several books on the argot, as he calls it, of pickpockets and the different language that housebreakers had, each subgenre of outlaw had a different kind of a language, and he called it argot, and he wrote books on them, compiled them. As an English professor, he was interested in that. But one day, it used to be on some Sundays, while he was resting at home, somebody would drive up to his home in Bentley and come and knock on the front door and say, hey, we got to talk to you. You've got the language of you've been publishing on language of different kinds of criminals and stuff like that, but you missed us, because we don't ever get caught. We're the confidence men. They're very proud of themselves. And they're con artists. And as they talked to him and tried to teach him about their language, they taught him a lot about what they do. So he got very fascinated in the psychology of how they do it and what goes on that way. And in his book, The Big Con, which is still a fascinating book to read, he shows that the most easiest, the people that conference men can most fool are other conference men. because they know how the other guy's mind works too. They can take advantage of it. And also, confidence men think they're the cream of the crop. They're so smart that they can't be fooled. And that makes me more vulnerable to another con artist. By the way, second most successful people to be conned are, I think it was clergymen, and then bankers. Anyway,
You have 5 minutes, sir.
okay, I got 5 minutes. So that's what the Matthew effect is. And
What is implied by the term false beliefs? I don't.
false
really
belief?
Yeah, I mean,
is-
are they trying to imply that there's such thing as a true belief, or, I mean, like,
Well,
belief?
without
Jeff.
going down that path, like, just in philosophy, it's justified true belief, but Ray, would you, if you have 5 minutes, would you mind just focusing on the replicability thing, because I think
That's my last lecture.
Yeah.
But I'm not in my last lecture.
Oh, no, then I misunderstood. I
I
thought
mean, this
lecture
next to the
was-
last lecture.
Yeah, I thought this lecture was the importance of replicability.
No, that's the last lecture.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not there yet. Don't rush me.
Oh, no, well, maybe I'm misreading the lecture 9. I mean, it says the importance of replicability.
That's lecture 10.
Well, not in the handout.
Then you misprinted it. No, importance of replicability is the last lecture, which is next.
You actually did include
What's that?
replicability in the 9 also.
Oh, what they did was, I had a heading for each pair of lectures, and that was the heading for the pair of lectures. They've re-edited this some way. I can show you my original one, okay? So I'm always right.
I believe you.
Okay, so I have, 1 minute, 2 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. So, we've covered a lot of ground in some ways, not so much maybe. But everything is pointed to making sure we've got good data, and the reasons why we want to make that, why it's hard to get good data. And some of the reasons are because we are cognitive misers, and the other reasons are because of the lack of adequate mindware or having mindware that's contaminated. In other words, so from there, I'm going to go just one step further, because we've been talking as if you can do an experiment that's going to give you adequate data, good data. And it turns out that's not true. A single experiment, no matter how good it is, even though there are people like to talk about crucial experiments and stuff like that, there's no such thing. Because as I said at the beginning, science is inductive, and it's a probabilistic thing. And the best experiment in the world could have unanticipated reasons why it is wrong. And also, just by flukes, things can be wrong. But because of our auxiliary conditions, initial conditions, you can't handle everything. A single experiment by itself is not sufficient to give you the kind of data you want. This is the importance of replicability. And I'm going to get to that next lecture and show you how pseudo-replicability, I think I'll call it, I just made up that word, can create a whole field which has lasted for over 150 years or so, called parapsychology. That's what we do next.